Welcome to the next in our series of online lectures for Western Civ 2. Today we're going to be talking about the Congress of Vienna and the rise of conservatism. As always, there are some key terms that you should keep in mind as you're watching this video, as well as some questions that you should be able to answer by the time we're done. Let's get to it. With Napoleon defeated, the great powers of Europe met in the city of Vienna to discuss the shape of the post-war world. These great powers included Great Britain, Austria, Prussia, and Russia. Interestingly, France was also included in this meeting. I say interestingly because the entire purpose of the meeting was to deal with the mess left by Napoleon and the French Revolution. This meeting lasted for more than a year and became known as the Congress of Vienna. The Congress of Vienna had three main goals. The first of those goals was to restore peace to Europe. The second goal was to restore order to Europe. And the third was to undo the French Revolution. So why was a meeting like the Congress of Vienna necessary? Well, first of all, the need to restore peace came from the fact that most of Europe had been at war almost continuously since 1793. Millions of people were dead. Economies were in a shambles. People were starving, and essentially Europe needed to be put back together again. But there was also a need to restore order to Europe. One impact of Napoleon's military conquests had been to overthrow kings and queens across Europe. Typically, he would overthrow a monarch and replace them with a member of his own family. With Napoleon's defeat, these new rulers were toppled. But who would replace them? How would Europe be governed now that Napoleon was gone? Finally, the Congress of Vienna also wanted to undo the French Revolution. Now this was easier said than done. Louis XVI was dead, so he could not be restored to the throne of France, nor could French absolutism be recreated. Thus, the Congress of Vienna does the next best thing. They crown Louis's brother as the new king of France. He becomes known as Louis XVIII. But dealing with these three goals was really only the beginning of the Congress of Vienna. The Congress of Vienna also sought to establish a permanent new order in Europe, a permanent new order that would prevent problems like the French Revolution and the Napoleonic Wars from cropping up once again. Therefore, the Congress of Vienna created something that they called the principle of legitimacy. This is a belief that only certain families had a legitimate right to rule as kings and queens. This right came from centuries of tradition. Thus, the Congress of Vienna replaced Napoleon's family members by restoring the proper ruling families to the kingdoms in Italy, Spain, Germany, and Portugal. But then they went farther. They pledged to prevent any future revolutions from threatening the legitimate order of things. Finally, they agreed that events like the French Revolution could never again be allowed to threaten Europe's order and stability. Thus, they agreed to a principle of intervention. This meant that should any kingdom be threatened by revolution, the great powers of Europe would work together to snuff out that revolution and keep order. If you haven't figured it out by now, the idea that is governing the Congress of Vienna is something called conservatism. Conservatism can be seen in both the principle of legitimacy and the principle of intervention. Now, conservatism is still a word that we hear today in our politics. And at its most basic, it does basically mean the same thing. It means the desire to conserve things as they are and to respect tradition over radical change. However, in most ways, the conservatism that we talk about today is very different from the conservatism they talked about at the Congress of Vienna. Here are the ideas of conservatism as they would have been seen by members of the Congress of Vienna. First of all, there is preservation of the status quo. In other words, we want to keep things the way they are. There was also a need, or a desire, I should say, to reject the ideas of the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment was believed to have been behind the problems of the French Revolution, and therefore anything that came out of the Enlightenment was thought to be very, very bad. And so the Congress of Vienna rejected the Enlightenment. And finally, and very related to that, they also rejected the French Revolution, obviously, because the French Revolution put many of the ideas of the Enlightenment into action. At the heart of conservatism at the Congress of Vienna was the Austrian foreign minister, Clemens von Metternich. Metternich had sort of acted as host for the Congress of Vienna. He also helped to set the agenda, and that agenda, not surprisingly, was very, very conservative. In fact, Metternich is one of the champions of conservatism in Europe during this period. That is obvious in this quote, which I'm going to read for you. Quote, "It is in times of crisis that monarchs are principally called upon to show themselves for what they are. Fathers invested with all the authority which belongs to heads of families, to prove that in dark times they know how to be just, wise, and by that alone strong, and that they do not abandon the peoples whom they have the duty to govern, to the play of factions, to error and its consequences, which will fatally lead to the destruction of society." Now think about it. What view of government and society does this quote display? What does it reveal about how conservatives see the world? Let's break it down. First, there's this phrase, which says a lot about how conservatives in Metternich's time saw the world. Kings, according to Metternich, were not tyrants. Instead, they were fathers, invested with all the authority which belongs to the heads of families. And as the fathers of their people, kings know how to be just, wise, and by that alone strong. And so, in the first two passages that I highlighted, we see Metternich praising monarchy. Monarchs are not tyrants; they are fathers. They know how to govern justly. That is how he sees how the world should work, according to Metternich. That's a very conservative view of the world in 1815. And then there's this. Now, when Metternich talks about the play of factions, he is talking about democracy. In other words, he is contrasting the rule of a monarch, which he says is just and wise, to that of democracy, which he says will, quote, fatally lead to the destruction of society, end quote. That's a pretty heavy thing to say. And in this respect, he is rejecting the ideas of the Enlightenment, and he is rejecting the ideas of the French Revolution. So in conclusion, the Congress of Vienna was all about trying to return the world to the way it was before the French Revolution. The problem was, times were changing. And it was going to be very, very hard to put the ideas of the French Revolution back into a bottle once they got out.